In a dramatic escalation of Middle East tensions, Iran has launched a direct strike on Israel, marking a turning point that many feared, but few expected to materialize so openly. But the specter that many feared would become a rationalization of regional dynamics, challenging Israel's long-standing strategic doctrine and raising the specter of a broader conflict. The attack not only tested Israel's defensive capabilities, but also sent shockwaves through the international community, prompting urgent diplomatic responses and military recalculations. For Israel, this strike embodies its greatest fear, a direct confrontation with a powerful adversary unafraid to act overtly. As nations around the world react, the balance of power in the region may be undergoing a historic transformation. Let's talk about the moment the game changed. The moment when Iran struck directly at Israel. Not through proxies, not through whispers in the dark or the shadowy hands of influence, but in the daylight, openly, decisively. That right there marked a psychological shift. For decades, both nations danced around the edge of confrontation, lobbing threats, funding allies, waging cyber wars. But a direct strike, that's something else entirely. That's no longer theater. That's a declaration not just of capability, but of intent. And that kind of move doesn't just hit concrete and steel. It lands in the mind, the national psyche, and in the moral compass of the world watching. Israel, for all its strength, has operated under a philosophy, a deeply ingrained belief that its proactive, often preemptive posture kept existential threats at bay. That belief has shaped its foreign policy, its military doctrine, even its national identity. Security through deterrence, safety through superiority. But deterrence only works if the other side buys into the illusion, if the other side still fears the consequences. And what Iran did by launching a direct assault was look straight through that illusion and say, we're not afraid anymore. Now understand this. It's not just about military capability. It's about the psychology of defiance. Iran wasn't just firing missiles. They were firing a message. We can reach you. We will reach you, and we are ready to pay the price. And when someone with power demonstrates they're willing to bleed, that's not just dangerous. That's disruptive. It forces everyone else to reevaluate the rules of engagement. Because now this isn't just a clash of armies. It's a clash of philosophies. Israel's belief in invincibility versus Iran's belief in sacrifice. And let me be clear, this wasn't just about geography. It was symbolic. Iran reached across borders to break a pattern that's held for decades. It's as if someone kicked open a door that generations had kept shut. And now, there's no one seeing it. No pretending it didn't happen. The psychological contract, the unspoken understanding between these two powers, has been rewritten. This act also served another purpose. It tested the global reaction. What would the United States do? What would Europe say? Would Arab nations condemn or remain silent? And perhaps most critically, how would the people of Israel respond? Because a missile strike may damage infrastructure, but what it really aims to hit is certainty. And when certainty wavers, when citizens, leaders, and soldiers alike feel that trembling under their feet, policy shifts, priorities scrambled, and the world begins to look different. Here's where it gets deeper. What we witnessed was not just a tactical decision, it was a philosophical one. Iran chose confrontation over ambiguity. It chose clarity over covert strategy. That's bold. That's dangerous. And that's a move that forces everyone in the room to reintroduce themselves. It says, you thought you knew us, you don't. Israel now faces a new question. How do you lead when your shadow no longer scares your enemy? That's not just a military question, that's a spiritual one. Because for any nation built on resilience, identity is tied to its ability to protect, to control, to know the game and stay 3 steps ahead. When that balance is disrupted, the recovery isn't just political, it's existential. And we, the global audience, are not bystanders. We're witnesses to a shift in the narrative of power. We have a responsibility to understand that this wasn't just about missiles, this was about will, this was about resolve, about two nations saying, in their own way, we are willing to define this era on our terms. That makes it our responsibility to ask better questions. Not just who fired first, but why now? Not just how do we respond, but what kind of world are we allowing to emerge? Because every moment like this, the kind that echoes through history, asks something of us. It asks us to choose between comfort and clarity, between looking away or looking deeper. So let me leave you with this. When fear becomes reality, it no longer has power over you. But what you do next, that's what defines you. Because after the dust settled, after the headlines moved on from the initial shock of Iran's direct strike, Israel had to reckon with something even heavier than damage. It had to reckon with doubt. Not doubt in its people, not even doubt in its soldiers, but doubt in the very doctrine that's guided the nation since its birth. The belief that overwhelming strength, fast decisions, and technological superiority could shield it from existential threats. For decades, Israel built its security doctrine around three core principles: speed, precision, and deterrence. And let me be clear, this wasn't just strategy. It was identity. It was theology written in the language of geopolitics. Never again became more than a historical vow. It was engineered into radar systems, layered into intelligence networks, and etched into the minds of every commander. The idea was simple. If we move fast enough, strike first, strike hard, and keep our enemies afraid, then we won't have to fight wars on our soil. We'll fight them out there before they ever reach our doorstep. But what happens when the storm does reach the doorstep? What happens when a missile slips past that armor? When the enemy doesn't flinch? When the technology that was supposed to guarantee safety blinks for even a moment? That's not just a strategic failure. That's a psychological rupture. Because here's the thing, fear cuts both ways. Israel's strength worked for so long because it inspired a kind of reverence and hesitation in its adversaries. That was the invisible shield, the aura of invulnerability. But when that illusion gets pierced, it doesn't just expose a weakness. It shakes the very foundation of perception. Suddenly the world sees differently. Allies ask quieter questions, enemies stand a little taller. And within Israel itself, a new kind of silence creeps in, one where certainty used to live. That kind of shake doesn't come from numbers on a chart. It comes from the subconscious, the deep, quiet places where nations keep their sense of self. And when that gets rattled, it's not just about defense systems anymore. It's about belief. Israel has always believed that its intelligence would see the threat before it arrived, that its air force would crush the danger before it took form, and that its deterrence would make even the idea of confrontation too costly for its enemies to consider. But Iran's strike changed that equation. It said, we're willing to pay. Now what? Now what? That question echoes louder than any explosion. And let me tell you, this isn't about weakness, it's about evolution. Because a doctrine that can't adapt becomes a myth. And myths, no matter how powerful, don't hold up under the weight of reality. Israel is at a crossroads now, not because it lacks strength, but because it has to ask itself, what kind of strength truly secures a future? It's not enough to be feared, you have to be understood. You have to be respected, not just for your force, but for your foresight. And that means shifting from defense to definition, from reacting to redefining what security looks like in a world that's changing faster than the missiles is trying to stop. Philosophically, this moment forces Israel to confront a deeper truth, that real security isn't just the absence of threat, it's the presence of vision. And that vision can't come from technology alone. It has to come from clarity of purpose, from knowing what you stand for when what you stand on starts to shake. And let's not forget, this moment isn't isolated. The whole region is watching. Nations are taking notes. Strategies are being rewritten. And if Israel wants to remain not just a force, but a force for stability, it has to lead with something stronger than dominance. It has to lead with direction. So what's next? That's not for missiles to decide. That's for minds, for hearts, for leaders who understand that sometimes strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about how deeply you can see. Here's the truth. When a doctrine is tested, it's not a loss, it's a lesson. And the nations that rise are the ones that listen to what that test is trying to teach them. Power isn't just about what you can do, it's about what you choose to do once the veil has been lifted. The strike may have shaken the ground, but it's what rises from that shaken ground that will define the future. Because what happened between Iran and Israel didn't just shake their own realities, it sent ripples through the entire region. See, every time a major power makes a bold move, it doesn't just challenge their enemy. It forces everyone else to choose who they are in that new light. Iran's decision to strike directly wasn't just an act of war. It was a statement of identity. It was Iran saying to the world, we're not operating from the sidelines anymore. We're stepping into the center. And that changed everything. For years, Iran's power was more suggestion than spectacle. It operated through influence, proxy forces in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Syria. It fought wars without uniforms, engaged battles without borders. But this was different. This was the veil dropping. This was Iran saying, we're not hiding our hand anymore. We're playing it in front of the world. And whether you agree with Iran or not, and many don't, the psychological weight of that choice can't be ignored. Because when a nation decides to act not just in pursuit of power, but in pursuit of recognition, that shifts the entire architecture of the region. That changes how neighbors behave, how enemies calculate, and how allies begin to whisper among themselves behind closed doors. Others. Suddenly, the old power dynamics start to feel outdated, and everyone's recalibrating. The Gulf states, for instance, they've always walked a tightrope between economic pragmatism and political caution. Many of them have been quietly warming up to Israel, not because they love it, but because they believe in the stability it offers. But Iran's strike changes the math. Now leaders in Riyadh, in Doha, in Abu Dhabi are asking themselves, can we still bet on Israel to hold the line? Or do we need to start making new arrangements just in case? And don't think for a second that Turkey isn't watching. Or Egypt. Or Jordan. These are countries that understand the value of perception, and perception just shifted. Because Iran didn't just show the region that it can strike, it showed the region that it's willing to. And in politics, willingness is sometimes more powerful than capacity. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about what this means for the United States, for Russia, for China, for the big players. Because when regional dynamics shift, global interests shift with them. The U.S. has long been Israel's unwavering backer, not just for moral reasons, but because Israel represented a certain kind of order, a reliable, calculated force in a volatile region. But when that reliability is tested, when unpredictability enters the equation, America starts looking at its commitments with a little more scrutiny. And other powers, those who've been waiting on the sidelines, watching, calculating, they start seeing openings, opportunities, gaps. Russia, for instance, sees a distracted West. It sees a region where old alliances are being redefined. And you better believe they're taking notes. China, it's playing the long game. It's watching to see how it can position itself not just as an economic partner, but as a diplomatic broker in a region where American influence may no longer feel inevitable. So we have to ask ourselves, what happens when the center of gravity begins to shift? What happens when one bold move forces everyone to reconsider their position on the board? It's like a game of chess where suddenly one piece moves in a way no one thought possible. Now everyone's strategy gets thrown out, the game resets. And that's where we are now. But don't mistake all this for chaos. This is transformation. And transformation, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. It demands that old assumptions die so that new realities can be born. Iran's strike didn't just shatter an illusion. It opened a door. And the region, the world, is deciding whether to walk through it or shut it fast and pretend nothing's changed. And here's what's wild. This isn't just about governments. It's about people. About everyday citizens in Tel Aviv and Tehran, in Cairo and Beirut. Because when the balance of power shifts, the first thing it touches is the ground that people stand on. It influences how they see the future. It changes what hope looks like and what fear sounds like. And we, those of us watching, analyzing, reflecting, we have a responsibility not to just talk about who won a battle or who lost a step, but to ask the deeper questions. What kind of future are we shaping when we reward boldness over wisdom? When we mistake force for leadership? When we allow the loudest move to drown out the wisest voice? Because at the end of the day, power that isn't guided by purpose turns to recklessness. And recklessness, no matter who it comes from, doesn't lead to peace. It leads to collapse. So here's the truth you walk away with. Every shift in power is also a test of character, not just for nations, but for people. And character isn't shown in how you strike. It's revealed in how you lead after the dust has settled. Let's take a moment and look beyond the region. Because while the missiles may have landed in the Middle East, the impact echoed far beyond it. Iran's strike on Israel didn't just test Israel's defenses. It tested the world's reaction. And what we saw wasn't just diplomacy, it was revelation. It showed us in real time who's ready, who's rattled, and who's rethinking everything they thought they knew about the global order. Now let's be real. When a flashpoint like this happens, the first thing everyone looks at is the United States. Because for better or worse, America has carried the weight of being the global responder, the stabilizer, the self-declared defender of international norms. Israel has counted on that for decades. But this moment put that alliance under the microscope. The U.S. was expected to stand firm, to move quickly, to send a signal, not just to Iran, but to everyone else watching. And sure, statements were made, meetings were held, ships were repositioned. But beneath all that, there was a hesitation, a pause. And in that pause, there was meaning. Because hesitation in geopolitics is not neutral. It's a message. A message to allies that says we're thinking. And a message to enemies that says we're uncertain. And when certainty begins to wobble, the world listens. The world takes note. Look at Europe. The same Europe that often calls for restraint, that warns against escalation, found itself split. Some nations called for unconditional support for Israel, others urged for de-escalation, and a few remained conspicuously quiet. And in that quiet, you could hear the internal struggle. Do we follow the old playbook, or do we admit that the board has changed? Now shift the lens eastward. China, Russia. These aren't just observers anymore. They're active players in this new landscape. China's not going to respond with troops or tanks, but is absolutely going to respond with strategy, with economic leverage, with backdoor diplomacy that positions it as the calm, calculated alternative to Western volatility. And Russia, it's watching all of this unfold with the cold patience of a chess master. Every crisis that stretches U.S. resources, every new fire that needs American attention is a win for Moscow. Because distraction, in their eyes, is opportunity. And if Iran's strike pulls American focus, if it drains energy and shifts resources, then Russia's hand in Ukraine just got a little freer. But here's the deeper truth. The real power shift isn't just between governments. It's in perception, in how ordinary people around the world interpret these moves. Because power, at its core, is a story. And when that story starts to change, when people begin to question who's strong, who's right, who's leading, that's when tectonic plates start to shift under the surface. Young people in the Arab world, in South Asia, even in parts of Africa. They're watching these events on screens in real time, and what they're seeing is a world that no longer operates on the old assumptions. They're seeing an Iran that's defiant, an Israel that's vulnerable, and a West that's uncertain. And whether or not that picture is complete, it's powerful. Because perception shapes policy. It shapes elections, it shapes alliances, and it shapes the future far more quickly than we often realize. And let's not forget the role of social media in all this. In the past, governments controlled the narrative. Now, the narrative is a wildfire. It moves faster than diplomacy, faster than fact-checking. And that wildfire is telling people across the globe that the age of assumed dominance is over. That boldness, even recklessness, can win the moment. And moments, when strung together, become momentum. That's why this isn't just about Iran or Israel. It's about a broader reckoning, a global recognition that the rules are being rewritten in real time. And the nations that are going to thrive in this new chapter are not the ones that cling to past glories, but the ones that know how to lead through change. To respond not just with might, but with meaning. Not just with policy, but with principle. Because when a crisis exposes cracks in the foundation, you don't just patch the surface. You ask yourself why those cracks were there in the first place. What assumptions did we build our strength on? What alliances did we treat as permanent when they were actually conditional? And what values did we preach that we failed to embody when the pressure rose? This is the conversation the world is being forced into. Not just who's right or who's wrong, but what kind of order we're willing to live under. What kind of leaders will follow, and what kind of future we're actually building, whether we're doing it deliberately or just letting it happen. So here's the takeaway. When the world watches, it's not just looking for who has the power, it's looking for who has the clarity. Because in uncertain times, clarity becomes a rare kind of strength. And maybe that's what we need more than anything right now. Not more weapons, not more declarations, but more clarity about who we are, about what we stand for, and about what kind of world we're ready to fight for. Not just with force, but with vision. So now we arrive at the edge of all that's been said, not just to sum it up, but to center it. Because this isn't just about Israel. It's not just about Iran. It's not even just about the missiles or the headlines or the alliances that feel suddenly less certain. This moment, this rupture in the pattern is about something bigger. It's about a world that just got a little more honest with itself. A world where illusions were stripped away and what was left was not comfort, but clarity. We saw fear come true. We saw doctrine challenged. We saw boldness shift the balance. We saw the global community hesitate, fracture, reveal its own anxieties and how it responded. Or didn't. But here's the deeper truth. Fear becoming real doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's the start of vision. Sometimes it's the first step toward transformation. Because the world doesn't get better by staying safe. It gets better by seeing clearly and choosing courage over comfort. So now the question isn't what happens next. The real question is, what do we do with what we now know? We've seen that power without direction is dangerous. That strength without wisdom is hollow. That silence in moments that demand clarity is its own kind of failure. And now we're called, every leader, every citizen, every voice, to respond not with fear, but with focus. History isn't made in the noise, it's made in the decisions that follow. And those decisions are coming. So choose to be awake. Choose to ask better questions. Choose to speak with purpose, because the world just changed. And how we answer that change will echo for generations. And here's the final truth. In the face of uncertainty, clarity is a form of power. There's no such thing as power. Clarity is a form of power. Seek it, and you will find it.